Together, we work as one. For our communities worldwide. We work tirelessly for better laws and protection, better representation, better funding and access, better emergency relief and response, better knowledge and understanding. We amplify a global cause. We advocate and carry the voices of activists. We support a growing global movement and celebrate LGBTIQ lives everywhere. We won't stop until we achieve our mission. Equality and justice. Together for better LGBTIQ lives outright.
Welcome to this webinar that Outright is organizing today as we're releasing a new report about the situation for LGBTIQ people in Afghanistan a year and a half into the Taliban takeover. Unfortunately, what many of us feared has become true. We've seen an increase in the persecution by the Taliban of queer people and how it's become more systematic over the last year. So the report and the findings are grim, and we'll hear more about it shortly. I know most of you know Outright International, but if you don't, let me give you a very quick introduction. I'm Maria Sherin. I'm the executive director of the organization. I've been with Outright for over 9 years, and I've been the executive director. I was appointed in August. For Outright, to summarize our purpose in a sentence, we say together for better LGBTIQ lives. And to describe what we do, we say that we amplify. We want to ensure that LGBTIQ voices are heard. And like we're asking you today, to be a global witness to the persecution of LGBTIQ communities. We advocate. In the case of Afghanistan, it's critical that the international community do much more to find ways to create access to aid and protection for LGBTIQ people in Afghanistan. And this includes the UN agencies and many of the governments that are engaging, and also, of course, to ensure that people who need to leave can do so in a safe way. Even leaving Afghanistan, of course, is a challenge, and even worse so trying to get to what could be considered some level of a safe country. And I want to point out, of course, the particular challenges that women and trans people face. We need countries to step up and create these safe pathways. So there's a lot of advocacy that has to be done in order to achieve this. The third thing that Outright does is we support. We build the capacities of activists and provide grants and training. And the fourth pillar is that we celebrate. And I truly hope that in the future we'll have an opportunity to celebrate in relation to Afghanistan, but we're not there at the moment. Thank you so much for being here today. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Neela Ghoshal, who is going to moderate today's session. Neela, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Maria, and thank you to everybody for being here with us today. We are really glad to see that there's so much interest in this report. It is terrible and disturbing to have to do research on the types of human rights violations that we're identifying in Afghanistan. It is a grim subject, and yet if we are, if there's any kind of bright side, it's the fact that so many people have expressed interest in our work on Afghanistan and are interested in actively working and engaging to find out how we can possibly move things forward to make things a little bit safer for LGBTIQ people in Afghanistan, those who are trying to leave and those who have left. I want to just briefly say something about where this report fits into Outright's overall work. And first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm the Senior Director of Law Policy and Research at Outright, and I oversee a number of pieces of Outright's work on humanitarian inclusion. So we're working on making sure that when there are humanitarian crises, that LGBTIQ people are always included. On conflict and crisis more broadly, looking into how atrocities can be prevented against LGBTIQ people in conflict and crisis settings, how we can ensure access to protection and access to transitional justice. And this includes through our research, through our UN program and our international advocacy, as well as through our engagement with LGBTIQ human rights organizations on the ground in many countries that we work on. We have a long history of engaging in contexts of conflict and crisis. Outright was among the first organizations that brought to the attention of the international public the crisis of ISIS attacks and killings of LGBTIQ people in Iraq and Syria. We tried to put this on the international agenda as something that was an essential element of human security and that institutions like the Security Council needed to be addressing in their work. We've continued to engage with the Security Council through primarily the NGO Working Group on Women, Peace, and Security, as well as through other engagements around conflict settings in which we're identifying grave human rights violations that need an international response. So the Afghanistan work is part of this much broader, unfortunately too broad, body of work in which LGBTIQ people in conflict settings are suffering targeted abuses, and often these abuses are too invisible, and part of what we hope to do is expose these abuses and demand an international response. So I'm very happy to have three panelists with us today. The first is J. Lester Feder. Lester is Outright's Senior Fellow for Emergency Research. He researches the situation of LGBTIQ people in significant global crises. And Lester is also a journalist and photographer who has reported in more than 40 countries. We also have with us today Basira, who is an Afghan LGBTIQ human rights defender. She advocates for the recognition, protection, and legalization of the Afghan LGBTIQ community's human rights, equality, and freedom. Basira is the founder of Afghanistan's first informal LGBTIQ community and is a board member of the Afghan LGBTIQ organization. And we also have with us Kathryn Hampton, who is the head of impact at Rainbow Railroad, one of our important partner organizations. Kathryn has responsibility for organizational development and strategy on programs, research, and policy, and is a human rights advocate with more than a dozen years experience in refugee protection, research, and policy. And I'm sure many of you know Rainbow Railroad. If you don't, Kathryn will speak about them a little bit more, but they have been doing really essential work on protecting LGBTIQ people who are leaving or attempting to leave Afghanistan and helping them find safe passage. So I would like to moderate this discussion as a conversation with our three panelists. And I want to start by speaking with Basira, who was in Afghanistan at the time of the Taliban takeover in August 2021. Basira, could you begin by just giving us your overall impressions on how the situation for LGBTIQ people on the ground in Afghanistan has changed since the Taliban took over 18 months ago?
Hello, thank you so much for your support and for your efforts to Afghanistan LGBTQI community. Before the Taliban, however, there wasn't any legal insurance or guarantee for freedom or for recognition of LGBT in Afghanistan, but still they had the chance to have gathering with their friends to work, to survive. After Afghanistan collapsed by Taliban, everything changed dramatically among all the people, especially for LGBTQ+ community, because the Taliban have strict laws, regulations, beliefs against LGBTQI, and they start working against LGBTQI by torturing them, killing them, abducting them, and also promoting the idea of anti-LGBTQI plus violence among the people in the mosque or in religious gatherings. So not only the current regime, even the people turned to as enemy for LGBTQI. Their family, their friends, their relatives, their neighbors, even if they know about their ID, they all are trying to harm them, trying to torture them, trying to kill them, trying to report them to the Taliban. So not only working or having a job or having fun it's like impossible thing. Even they do not have access to healthcare, to food, to somewhere to stay. So zero opportunity for them to have their very primary and basic human rights.
Thank you, Basira. I mean, it sounds like it's an impossible situation where there is absolutely no form of protection coming from any quarter. I wondered if you were one of the researchers on this report, and I wondered if you could speak to a couple of the cases that you found most kind of significant or noteworthy in terms of what these cases told us about the way in which the Taliban is targeting LGBTIQ people.
Thank you. In this research, we did interview with LGBTQI Afghans who are inside Afghanistan. Among them, there were women when birth assigned as women or female, and also the trans women, trans men, and also gay people. Among them, I will talk about Najwa, who is a lesbian, 31 years old. When the Taliban start capturing the provinces where she was living in the north of Afghanistan, and the districts of that province was captured by Taliban, she decided to go in a major city, in one of big cities, to stay away from the people who knows her gender ID, sexual orientation. So she left the home, she left her family and stayed with one of her friends. When she was there, all Afghanistan collapsed by the Taliban. And the Taliban day by day start cruel rules against the LGBTQI community and against women. Well, she was a woman, she was a lesbian, and she was alone. She was away from family. She didn't have any protection from anyone. Even she didn't know where to go, what to do, and how to raise her voice on that situation. Like even her friend asked her to leave because we cannot face problem like the Taliban came and they make trouble to us, to our families, to leave us. On that situation, like how hard it is for someone to decide what to do. Well, they do not have any option to do for surviving, for living. She goes to one of the drivers and asks if he can drop her to her province. Well, when he considered, or he saw like she's alone, she doesn't have mahram. She asked, "Where is your mahram?" She couldn't see anything. On that time, like all the men start talking, start saying like, "You are a woman, you are alone. Why? What is the reason?" So everyone start judging her and telling everything like, "You are a war. If you were a good woman, you have never wanted to travel alone. If you were a good woman, absolutely your family male members will accompany you. So why you are asking this to me to drop you in another province?" On that time, she decides to run away before any Taliban comes and catch her. Why you are alone and you want to live for another province? What is the reason for being this lonely? And she goes to another friend's home and begs if they can allow her to stay for some days. And right now, like same to Najwa, we have many other lesbian women who do not have the support of their family, their friends, the support of any organization, humanitarian organization inside Afghanistan because of the current regime. And the regime is totally against them. Likewise, one of gay men, Farzad, he has faced to the violence by the Taliban several times. One of them was when he wanted to go to go outside for a walk, and some of the Talibans were having walkie-talkies and guns, and the ranger car, which carrying the former government was using, the former government soldiers were using, and now the Taliban soldiers are using. They came to her and asked her to go with them. When she didn't want to go, they urged and asked and took her with force. And when they took her to the police station where the other Talibans were staying, they saw her mobile phone, the videos, and also because of her hair and look like, they all asked a lot of questions like, why you look like this and you're not like a man? Where is your beard? Where is your why you have long hair with this style? So a lot of, after these questions, they start making mockery like by touching her body. And when she insisted like please don't do that, or begged don't do that, they become more cruel. They start beating her, laughing her. So it's too hard to say that there is not any even mercy among those soldiers for LGBTQI people as a human. Even an animal being tortured, as a human, we are supposed to feel not to torture that animal, but they behave worse than an animal to a gay man or a trans woman or trans man. Why? Because they believe that if we torture them, it not only gives us the pleasure that we laugh and it's a fun time, but beside of that, it's something we do good for our religion. It has good results for our religion, like we are doing something good deed in front of our religious duties. So because of that, they do all of them. And likewise, we have Nabila and Medina, two sisters who are intersex. However, in Islam, like there is a belief Allah has created all creatures, and every creature should be respected, accepted the way they are, because they all are the power of Allah that has created the humans in different shapes, in different colors, in different tribes. So, but still, among the people, they consider being intersex as a sign of evil or a sign of punishment for their parents for doing uh, guilt or sin in the past. Nabila and Medina, they both are like intersex, and however their family, their parents tried their best to keep it hiding, but still their neighbors, their relatives did know that they are intersex because they do not get period. Having fun or mockery, laughing on them and excluding them from parties, from gatherings in the village. When the Taliban, like it was before the Taliban, when the Taliban came, so many challenges start against them because of being intersex. Being intersex was a tool for the people in around to make them frightened. Every time when they wanted to do something or even to go work, for them it was a threat, like we will tell the Taliban that you have two daughters who are intersex and who should be stoned because they are not like other humans, they are like devils. So it was making their parents afraid, so that's why their parents decides to have an arranged marriage for Medina, the older sister. And the result of this marriage was much more worse than the past, because the man who with him she got married, when realized that she is an intersex, she starts behaving very cruel and brutally. He got all her jewelries and do not give food, and even she is forced to sleep out of the home and outside in couches. So this is much worse than the past, because even now her mothers can't do anything, can't go to anyone to ask for justice, to ask for human rights of her daughter. If she goes to the current regime who have the power, they will even they will they will torture or punish that mother as well. Why as a woman you are coming to me to ask for justice, for equality for your intersex daughter? And why your daughter is like this? Maybe you have done sin and guilt in the past, and this is the result of your guilt. So now you should answer to this question as well. So like this, for her younger daughter Nabila, she can't go, she can't work, she can't go outside, she can't get married, she can't get treatment, because recently the Taliban government um, uh, on the media they said that no one can have surgery for their sexual orientation. So they can't have the surgery, so they don't have any way from medical perspective, from human rights perspective, so no option for them what to do in such situation. And now this is our responsibility to be their voice in this platform, not only here, even in anywhere, to stand for their rights, for their very basic humanitarian rights, and stop these cruel and brutal actions, this violence against LGBT community of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Basira, thank you so much for sharing these stories, and thank you for documenting these stories. It cannot be easy as an Afghan yourself, who's gotten out of the immediate danger to be in this context of speaking to people who are still in danger and finding it so hard to find ways to offer any kind of support to them. There's a couple things that that Basira said that I just wanted to highlight. And one is the kind of interplay between public sentiment and the threat of Taliban abuse. Basira pointed out that even the public turn to enemies for LGBTIQ people, and there is the constant threat of reporting LGBTIQ people, the threat to parents that their intersex children will be stoned. And the Taliban playing on this as essentially an occupying power, playing on the idea that abuse against LGBTIQ people may be one way to win popular support, which is something that Outright has seen in other contexts as well. And I'm also just noticing from these stories the intersections between violence against women generally and against lesbian, bisexual, trans, and queer and intersex women in particular. It's clear that the context in which women's rights are violated has both general and specific impacts on lesbian, bisexual, queer, trans, and intersex women. And the fact that women are essentially men's property takes away opportunities from LGBTQI women to have any way out. So thank you for sharing those stories. Lester, I want to turn over to you. You were the lead researcher on a previous report that Outright put together in partnership with Human Rights Watch last year on the initial documentation of violence and threats against LGBTQI Afghans. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about, having followed this for a year and a half now, what have you seen change? A couple points that the report notes is that violence seems to have become more systematic, and also that the violence has clearly gendered dimensions. So could you speak a little bit to those 2 points?
Of course. Yeah, thank you. And Basira, thank you for your moving comments just now and all your work on the report. Let me take those in reverse order, since you were just speaking about the continuity between violence against women and violence about queer women, violence against queer women. We organized this report based on assigned birth gender because in Afghanistan, those have really big different implications for how people can move through space and legal expectations. Basira spoke about the one woman's story where she didn't have a mahram to travel with her, and that and a number of other restraints on women's mobility put them at risk of very different kinds of violence. In the cases that we have in this report, as in the previous report, the primary risk to women is generally, or to people who are assigned female at birth, is generally, at least at the beginning, family based. That has a lot of continuity when family members are part of the Taliban or are related in other ways, but that remains the main threat to people assigned female at birth. People assigned male at birth have a very different set of challenges and are much more likely to encounter what we would ordinarily consider state violence if the Taliban were a legitimate government. So run-ins with police, other interactions that take place in public, parties, those are spaces where people considered legally male under the Afghan system are able to move, and women are not, and so they face very different challenges. As you noted, one of the biggest findings from this report, as compared to a year ago, is that there is a systematic nature to anti-queer violence. And by systematic, we mean that there's a concerted effort to identify and target people on the basis of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or sex characteristics. A couple very clear signs of that. There were a number of locally reported or a number of incidents where the judiciary administered punishments, including flogging for people accused of homosexuality and other accusations. Those were occurred in different regions. And then we had the Supreme Court of Afghanistan issue on its official Twitter channel an announcement of a similar punishment happening in Kabul. That's alarming, not only because it suggests there's some kind of formal procedure happening in different parts of the country to formally punish people accused of homosexuality, but also that this would reach the level of importance from a public messaging or propaganda standpoint that the Supreme Court would feel a need to put it out through its own social media channels. And we already know that the government of Afghanistan has asserted, or the de facto government of Afghanistan has asserted that their interpretation of Sharia law has superseded the criminal code, which already provided for criminalization of homosexuality. But that raises things again to a new level of trying to institute measures that formally punish LGBT people. We also have seen efforts to either track down specific individuals or to go house to house and searching in general for people, but also targeting LGBTIQ people in a way that we had not seen previously. It's all extremely concerning.
Thanks for that, Lester. Kathryn, I want to turn to you for a moment to add your observations on the same question. I know that Rainbow Railroad also recently published a report on violence against LGBTIQ people in Afghanistan based on the appeals for support that your organization has been receiving. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the overall trends that you are seeing from those appeals, as well as maybe one or two cases that are particularly indicative of the type of violence that people are experiencing right now.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And I really want to congratulate Basira and Lester on this really, really important report. And it's so nuanced, it's so detailed, and the contribution of really having an in-depth intersectional understanding of differential impact on people based on their legal gender is such an important contribution. So as you mentioned, Rainbow Railroad is an organization that supports LGBTQI people at risk around the world, particularly related to their relocation to a safer country. And we have received thousands of requests from Afghans in Afghanistan and in neighboring countries. We've been able to support resettlement of more than 250 LGBTQI plus Afghans, and we're currently working with the Canadian government on resettling another 600 plus LGBTQI plus Afghans to Canada. So as you mentioned, in addition to our recent report published last year based on requests for help that we received, I also have updates from our casework team based on the trends that they're observing, dialoguing with hundreds of Afghans while working on their cases. The trend that our caseworkers report is that they've seen a real intensification, particularly within the last 2 months. So of course, starting in August 2021, the takeover of the Taliban, it was a terrible situation, but actually even within the past 2 months, they've noticed a significant uptick in exactly what you're reporting, the systemic and really targeted efforts to track down and oppress LGBTQI plus people. One trend, for example, is that Taliban seem to be making a particular effort to investigate locations where LGBTQI plus social events or parties are being held, interrogating employees, trying to track down clients. And so when we're working with people on their refugee applications, even over the course of completing one application, they might have to relocate multiple times for their own safety. So for example, an Afghan human rights defender, a cisgender gay man, saw that a Taliban commander was circling around his family home looking for him, and he was able to hide and pretend he wasn't home on that occasion. That went into hiding, but he was still found by the commander who sexually assaulted him and brought other Taliban members to engage in a group sexual assault. And so after that, he again went into hiding, but he's very afraid that they'll find him again. And regarding institutionalization of Sharia, another trend that I'd like to point out is our report was based on looking at around 1,700 requests for help that we received. And in that group, only 4 people mentioned receiving Taliban arrest warrants, usually sent to their family home. But within this group of 300 plus people where we've submitted their applications to the Canadian government, more than a dozen have reported arrest warrants. And the warrants that we have looked at and translated are purportedly issued by Directorate of Intelligence, Ministry of Internal Affairs, and sometimes from a branch based in one governorate directed to a home governorate, because people are often going between, a capital city and a rural area, or Kabul and their home province, to escape detection. And so that's something that we are very concerned about, although it can be very difficult, as your report mentioned, to figure out which branch of the Taliban is engaged in specific human rights violations. But there's an indication that behind that veil, there is a significant degree of coordination happening.
Thanks for that, Kathryn. And I think probably when people were publicly flogged for the first time in November, and then the Supreme Court made this announcement essentially confirming that it will punish people for homosexuality, that has probably really increased the stakes in terms of local authorities feeling empowered to carry out punishments and search for people as well.
Neela, I'm sorry, I had a couple of things I wanted to pick up on from what Kathryn said, if that's okay. So one thing, Kathryn, thank you for highlighting the growing crackdown on parties. And I think this is important to to highlight because of the economic situation for so many queer Afghans, especially gender nonconforming people assigned male at birth. Before the Taliban's return to power, dancing at weddings and parties was a key source of income. And we're in a general climate, right, where Afghanistan is in economic free fall. There aren't a lot of good options for queer people who have difficulty accessing food aid, for example. And so many people who were either entertaining at parties or earning their living from sex work before the Taliban's return to power have tried to stop because of the danger, and were forced to return to work because they had no other way to feed themselves. So this is an economic situation as well as a policing situation. The other thing I wanted to highlight from all three of us is that one thing we have not talked about is extrajudicial killings. And the reason that we're not talking about that is because they're incredibly hard to confirm. We have one case that we consider confirmed in this report of a gay activist who was found dead outside of a police station. His family reported to me that the doctor examined him and found evidence of sexual assault. But in most cases, we've received numerous other reports of people who either said they knew directly or had heard about people being killed in other settings. In some cases, multiple reports that seem to overlap, but not to a level where we could say with confidence. But I think we need to be, it's worth saying that just because we don't have confirmed cases of that doesn't mean it's not happening. It remains a very high level of concern that people may be being targeted in that way, but it's always very hard to document because of the stigma that is attached to homosexuality.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lester. And I think we'll speak a little bit more a bit later about the international community, and particularly those who are on the ground, who perhaps could be doing more to document these kinds of cases. I want to ask another round of questions to all of our speakers, and I'm going to ask you to keep your responses a little bit short, maybe to just 2 minutes, so that we also have time for questions from participants. And I also want to encourage participants, if you do have questions, to start to put them into the Q&A, the Q&A function, and then we'll be able to take those questions after we go through another round from our speakers. So please go ahead and put anything into that box that you are wondering about at this point. Kathryn, I want to come back to you to ask about the challenges in getting people out of Afghanistan. You mentioned that you've received 1,700 requests, and I think that you've been able to resettle 260 or so of them. And of course, that's getting anybody out is a tremendous accomplishment. And we are so happy that Rainbow Railroad is doing the work that it's doing. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a small number. And this is, of course, not Rainbow Railroad's fault. But can you tell us why it's so difficult to get people out of Afghanistan and to safety, and what the international community could be doing to make this easier?
Thank you so much for that question, Neela. And it's something that's always top of mind for us, and very frustrating knowing how many people are at very grave risk and need to be resettled with the limited numbers that we're working with, although we're very grateful for every spot that we have, and we can move someone to a safer location. I think one of the really important things for governments to be aware of is the importance of partnering with LGBTQI+ led organizations like Rainbow Railroad, because we do a lot of work supporting our case individuals to complete their applications, and there are so many barriers. And we've been talking about legal gender, and obviously for people who are assigned with a female at birth, they face a lot of barriers in, submitting their applications and getting to appointments. So for example, one of our case individuals, a lesbian woman, her parents are deceased. She lives with her sister. She doesn't have brothers. And she has one male cousin who gets groceries and takes them to appointments. If he knew about her asylum application, she would be at risk because that would make him, very upset. She would have to tell him about her identity. So she had to find a way to get one of her former colleagues at the university where she worked to print out her IRCC refugee application. And then it's in English. Her cousin doesn't know English. So the colleague was able to say, oh, can you take this document? But it's actually such a risky process. Every piece of evidence that they need for their asylum claim, like photos and videos related to their LGBTQI+ identity or related to persecution they've experienced, can actually put them at risk. So we're constantly having to come up with workarounds where they can delete all of the data from their phone, but still, have access to, information they need for their case, but it wouldn't be accessible to Taliban if they were stopped at a checkpoint. And I think another really important thing to mention is about rainbow families. And many of the case individuals that we work with were, forced by their families to marry an opposite gender sex partner. They have children. In some cases, this person, knows about their identity and supports them and didn't want to be married to them either, but it's just the situation they were in. But because of our legal system, it would not be recognized. People are forced, they're put in the heartbreaking situation of choosing between their same-sex partner that they're attracted to and their legal spouse, who's an opposite sex partner and the parent of their children. And within our refugee system, that would be considered polygamy, and they wouldn't be able to, bring both partners. So there are a lot of logistical barriers when we're thinking about, how to get people to safety through our current systems.
And Kathryn, just one more question on that. Are countries willing and able to take in more people if there's a way to get them out, or are there also barriers there?
I think we've seen a huge backlash against refugee and asylum protections. But there is willingness by some governments recognizing the role that coalition governments played in Afghanistan. But for us, the primary challenge is getting those resettlement slots. The other really significant barrier is a lack of transparency and around wait times, because people can't afford to wait in Pakistan indefinitely. They are afraid of being deported from Pakistan, which would then put them literally into the hands of the Taliban. And so if you have to wait in Pakistan for a year or longer to complete a security and medical check, and you have no idea when your interview will take place, that's really an untenable situation for many people, compounded by the financial difficulties that Lester mentioned.
Thanks, Kathryn. So Lester, I'm going to ask you to answer an extremely complex question in about 1 minute, which is, even if the international community did everything that it could to help address these logistical barriers to resettlement and to get people out, most LGBTIQ people would still be in Afghanistan for whatever reason. They would not get out, and they would remain there, as is always the case when refugees leave a country due to insecurity. Most people stay. What can the international community do to make things safer on the ground for queer people who are in Afghanistan and who will still be there a year, 2 years, 5 years down the line?
I don't know that I can give a very satisfying answer in 1 minute, but I would say that the most important first step is to find a way to talk to them. And that's actually quite a difficult challenge. I see we also have a question about doing qualitative research. One of the first steps to finding out about the situation on the ground in Afghanistan for LGBTIQ people was to find researchers who had the competence and the language skills and the familiarity with the networks to make people feel safe that they could speak up. That's really difficult for agencies that are working with local staff and interpreters because of the stigma in Afghanistan. One of the best resources may be Afghans like Basira in diaspora who are able to participate remotely, but really finding creative ways to open that communication and then ideally build support networks out of that. But if you don't clear that first hurdle, everything else won't be productive.
Thanks, Esther. That's really helpful. So really, I think a request to the organizations that are on the ground in Afghanistan to make those connections and begin to develop together with queer Afghans paths to safety within the country, or at least to greater safety and protection. Basira, one last question for you. Despite the extremely challenging context in Afghanistan, you and others outside the country have been determined to be a voice for queer Afghans and to organize. Can you tell us a little bit about what Afghan civil society, LGBTIQ civil society organizing looks like at this moment from the diaspora and what you hope to be able to do?
Yes, Afghan LGBT organization organized officially in late 2021. Since that, we could help some Afghan LGBTQI community who were struggling financially inside Afghanistan, or who were trying to find safe place for hiding or leave Afghanistan, leave the country. Some of our missions or our helps that we have done is we helped financially 117 people, LGBT people inside Afghanistan. Financially, we supported them. And also we arranged to support and help 87 people, LGBT people, to get out of Afghanistan. We supported this directly or indirectly. For example, we helped them to reach another supportive international organizations to support them to get out of Afghanistan. So 87 people become able to leave Afghanistan safely. And beside that, we supported legally for their legal rights. 35 people, like we helped them to prepare their documents and get become able to get a humanitarian visa of Brazil, Australia, and some European countries. 9 people, LGBT people inside Afghanistan who needed urgent medical support. We tried them and we helped them to get medical support because they were very sick and they needed urgent medical support. And also we supported 27 Afghan LGBT in Turkey to get financial support. Like we supported them financially, and beside that, we helped them legally for processing their asylum seeker application for other countries. And also to mention this, we get a lot of queries, like a lot of message or text from Afghan LGBT who ask for help, who ask for support. But we can't, because we do not have that much opportunity or that much ability to help them, but still we're trying. Every day we get text in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our website. 837 inquiries was sent to us, so we could manage to help this much people, as I mentioned, financially, legally, or for evacuating from Afghanistan? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Basira. So I see that we have a number of questions in the Q&A, and I want to start with one, and I see that Kathryn has answered a couple of them that deal specifically with the asylum process. I will come back to Kathryn maybe with a couple more of the questions here. But I wanted to start with a question that says, very interesting that homosexuality and homosexual acts are both unwanted and form of punishment, covert punishment by the same regime policing sexuality. Basira, this is something that you pointed out in terms of sexual assault being used as punishment against LGBTIQ people. And Lester, I know it's something that you have used as well, that you've identified as well in your research. What do we know about this ideology, and how can we in the global community call this out and work toward its end? I assume that mainstream rape crisis responses may miss particular experiences of queer people in these situations. So that is the question. And of course, I want to add that there's, I want to just say that there's the added challenge of civil society workers that are female not being able to work right now. So, you know, even challenges around rape crisis for cis heterosexual women are in the balance right now. But Lester or Basira, do you have any thoughts on this idea that, of course, this is not just in Afghanistan. In many places, same-sex acts are criminalized, but are also used as a form of punishment in the form of rape and sexual assault?
I can take a stab at that. It's a very complicated question. I think, you know, unfortunately, where homosexuality is stigmatized, it is, you know, it makes a lot of room for abuse. And that is definitely the case in Afghanistan. We also, there's an endemic problem of child sexual abuse, that in some cases you have gender nonconforming boys who are forced into sex work at an early age, and then continue that as adults and are vulnerable to attack. We have many cases of people who are attacked in various ways and present to doctors or to police officers and then are re-victimized. So this is really endemic. One thing I would say is sort of to turn that around, there is also in that environment an opportunity for international advocacy or for supporting Afghan advocacy. One of the spaces where the Taliban has been open to some intervention about violence against gender nonconforming people has been around curtailing this practice of bachabazi, which is this cultural practice of forcing young boys mostly into a form of sexual slavery. That is a very challenging space, right? Because if you do try to punish it, it also creates even more space for abuse. But there has been an opening from the Taliban regime to counter that. It's a very effective intervention, and it can protect not only children, but transgender women and gay men. It creates a space where there's more access to some forms of protection if done properly. One thing Neela, I just want to quickly add, one thing I neglected to say in response to your question earlier is about things that the international community can do more of. One of the most critical problems now is also what limited civil society there was that had competence in working with LGBTIQ Afghans are losing many of their funding streams as the international community is responding to the Taliban regime, including the recent rule about excluding women from working in NGOs. That obviously is responding to real policy concerns, but at the same time, by depriving those organizations of funds or just the currency restrictions that makes it hard to transfer money, what limited civil society there is that is able to do that work is losing its ability to do it.
Thanks, Lester. I want to actually turn to Basira with a couple other questions that are somewhat related. One is whether there is any way to get support to LGBTIQ people within Afghanistan. So maybe you can speak to that and what the best way is for people who want to provide that kind of support to direct it. And there's another question about whether your organization is in contact with LGBTIQ organizations in Pakistan or India, for instance. There's also a question about Central Asian countries and whether people are, queer Afghans are leaving Afghanistan for Central Asian countries and whether they're safe there. So I guess kind of couple separate but related questions around how to get support to people in the country, and also, do you have any networks with folks in the neighboring countries who can do more to make LGBTIQ people safe, who are leaving for those countries?
Thank you. First of all, for immediately, what can we do for Afghan LGBT community is financial support for surviving, because they do not have access to work, to provide food, to provide healthcare for right now, like immediately. And after that, what we can support them to be evacuated to safe countries. That's good, because our organization, however, in a very less time, could build some network among South Asian LGBTI communities and organizations. However, in South Asia, LGBT communities are not that powerful to support other countries, asylum seekers, LGBT asylum seekers. So they are not that much powerful to provide that directly, but still they can help us, they can support us for finding shelters for short terms inside those countries. We could build that network in 2 years. We were active, and for about the Central Asian countries, in Central Asian countries like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, it's not allowed, it's illegal. However, like Iran, they do not have punishment of death or obviously in the law and regulations, but still it's legal and punishable. So that's why in those countries, communities are usually informal if they are working inside, but if they are active, they are not inside those countries, they are outside. So we have contact with them, but still we couldn't manage for a safe way for Afghan LGBT to be evacuated in Central Asian countries. In the future, we'll see. In Turkey, the Afghan LGBT people who went to Turkey by smugglers from Iran, through Iran, they are in Turkey, they refer to us for support that I mentioned. 27 of them got the financial and legal support in the Turkey. So yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Basira. As you can see, it's extremely challenging to figure out ways to support these communities, but there are some ways, and I encourage you all to keep in touch with us if you're looking for more specific ways to support people. I have one last question, I think, for Kathryn. Before I get to that question, I believe that our report has been posted. Yes, wonderful. Thank you to Fox for posting our report, so everybody can access it online. And Kathryn, I also want to invite you to post your report in the chat. And Basira, if there is a social media handle or anything like that for the Afghan LGBT organization that you would like people to follow, please also post that in the chat. So Kathryn, just last question to you. There's a couple, and there's a lot of questions we're not able to get to. I apologize for that, but there's a lot of interest and a lot of questions. And we are here for continued dialogue. The last question I will ask is with regard to the US accepting LGBTIQ refugees from Afghanistan. There are two separate questions on this. And I wondered if you could say anything about what kind of commitment there is from the US and what you are advocating for from the US government in terms of what it can do to make LGBTIQ Afghans safer.
Thank you so much for that question. And I've really appreciated the engagement in the chat. Yes, so the US government has pledged to admit 125,000 refugees globally, but without a specific target for LGBTQI+ refugees. Although the Biden administration has made this commitment that they are really determined that they will have more mechanisms in place to ensure that LGBTQI+ refugees have access to resettlement in the United States. But I thought it was a very good question in the chat. Why have the UK, the US not made more of a specific numerical benchmark commitment for LGBTQI+ refugees, whether in Afghanistan or elsewhere? And I think that would be a key advocacy ask for us. The second one is partnering with LGBTQI+ led organizations, whether that's with organizations like Basira's organization with Rainbow Railroad, based on the barriers that queer people face in accessing traditional resettlement channels, or accessing, UNHCR offices, and being targeted when they're going out in public, and needing to feel safe enough to have a trusted person where they can disclose their identity in a context where disclosing your identity means that you're going to be persecuted. And we really think that Rainbow Railroad partners with grassroots organizations around the world, and so we would really call on governments to make a concerted effort to increase the referral partnerships that they have with LGBTQI+ led organizations, just as the Canadian government has been doing with us through this effort.
Thanks, Kathryn. And I'm going to give Guster one last word because he has a point to make on this particular question as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth highlighting while we talk about the urgency for LGBTIQ people. We're in a context where there's much greater need in Afghanistan for safety than safe countries are willing to provide in visas right now. And that's not only the case for countries like the US and the UK that are safer for LGBT people, but we're also talking about even neighboring countries like Pakistan, which can harbor other people who would be safe there. And so it's really, and we're also in a context, Kathryn, correct me if I'm wrong, but that global target that the Biden administration set is, I believe, down from 200,000 annually at the end of the Obama administration. And in the US, we're even, if we could get back to those numbers, we're dealing with an immigration system that was deliberately undermined by the Trump administration and doesn't have the capacity to quickly process resettlement. And so if we want immigration systems and refugee systems that work for LGBTIQ people, we also need to be talking about a refugee system that works for all people, so that queer people can find paths to safety in that process.
Thank you so much, Guster. Very important point. Refugee rights, immigrant rights are LGBTIQ issues and always will be. So there are some systemic problems that we need to fix, not only to deal with this immediate Afghan crisis, but to deal with other crises that come down the road. Thank you so much to all of you, Lester, Kathryn, Basira. Thank you for your incredible work. Thank you for illuminating us today for the production of this report. Thank you to Maria for the opening remarks. Thank you to our tech team for supporting us with the webinar. And of course, thank you to all of you who stayed here beyond the hour to be with us, who are concerned about LGBTIQ Afghans and to finding durable solutions. It's only the beginning of the conversation, and this work and this conversation will continue. So we know that we can count on you to be there with us as we move forward. With that note, I will close the webinar and wish you all a wonderful rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you may be. Thank you.